Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing a wrap up for my 5-star non-fiction predictions list. So at the very beginning of the year I put out a video that was predictions of 5-star reads from non-fiction. I had 6 books in total and I have now read all of them. So we're going to look at how successful was I in predicting and what did I think to the books. This is the second time I've done a non-fiction round, so I'll link up in the cards and down below the other versions of this that I've done, and this is, I think I'm on my 3rd fiction one as well, so feel free to check that out if you like my fiction content as well as my non-fiction. The first book that I finished on the list was What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon, and this was indeed a 5-star from me. So Aubrey Gordon is a fat lady about town, as she describes herself, and had a blog for a while called Your Fat Friend. She's also a wonderful co-host of the podcast Maintenance Phase that looks at like fitness myths and sort of the wellness industry and debunking a lot of sort of fitness trends. This is a book that is looking specifically about fat phobia, and it's a combination of a little bit of a memoir but mainly a really critical look at how society treats fat people and how that has impact on their health, and sort of is a real area where we currently do a lot of harm that isn't being particularly addressed. It was an incredible read that was very, very eye-opening and definitely connected with a lot of the stuff that I've already heard from her on her podcast and sort of being aware of her work on the internet already. The only thing I wish that it had a little bit more of was I wanted a little bit more kind of statistical information. She was a little thin on the ground on some of the science and it was a little bit more focused on kind of social anecdotal stuff, so I would have liked a fraction more from the science of how we currently understand nutrition, weight loss, and sort of the impact that a higher level of fat has on the human body and where we are currently with our science compared to where we were before. So it's one that I think there is more area to expand, but it was an incredibly important book that I totally recommend to everybody. The next book that I finished on the list was also a 5-star read, but I do believe it dips down a little bit after then. I had a flying start and then it started to go a little bit wrong. But the 5-star read in question is Fabulosa, The Story of Polari, Britain's Secret Gay Language by Paul Baker. I've actually lent out my copy, so I'm just going to have to put a cover here. But this, as the subtitle suggests, is a non-fiction book tracking the history of a secret gay language that was talked, spoken in kind of the 40s onwards, I believe. I did read this a couple of months ago now, so maybe my time frame is slightly off, but it looks at sort of how did Polari form, what role did it have in the gay community, and sort of how did it become more mainstream, and then sort of where is it now and how is it viewed, and sort of all the various different routes from it, and the importance of when a community becomes marginalized, how things like Polari can sort of spring up and be really important to that community as a way of kind of talking safely and having an identity. Absolutely fascinating. It was really interesting from both like a social history but also from a linguistics perspective, looking at all the different sort of connections. I actually found out about this because of a podcast episode that Paul Baker was on. I can't remember the podcast now. He had kind of a guest episode where he talked a little bit about Polari in a bit more detail. Really, really cool. And this was actually the book is kind of based loosely off of his original PhD work that he did on Polari, that he's now sort of revamped and made more accessible to the general public, and it's a really fantastic read. You can so feel his love for it. I think it was very funny in places, like I said, incredibly accessible, and a real great book if you are interested in sort of the queer community, history in general, or linguistics in general. I think it's fab. The next book I finished was Dinosaurs Rediscovered by Michael J. Benton. This was also 5-star, so actually I was like 50-50 5-star and not 5-star, so that's not a bad hit rate. This is how a scientific revolution is rewriting history, and it's specifically looking at some of the more recent scientific advancements that have happened in the past decade or so that have completely changed how paleontology works and really moved it from a natural history to a more sort of hardline science. So it's looking at things like how computing data has completely, and kind of computing power has completely changed how we can sort of look at huge swaths of data and make connections between different dinosaur species, how that can be then used to kind of rework taxonomies and family trees, and sort of how advancements are changing how we sort of approach the fossils themselves. Things like being able to actually find color pigments, so we can see how some parts of some dinosaurs would have been colored. Absolutely fascinating. Michael J. Benton has definitely got a great writing style. It's not the most beginner-friendly book on dinosaurs. It does presuppose a decent level of knowledge because it's obviously talking about how the industry and sort of the community has changed compared to where it was before, so you do need to kind of know a bit about what it was like before, but I definitely really enjoyed it. It was one of those ones that I stayed up really late reading and just kept telling her and being like, babe, this is such a cool fact. So really, really enjoyed it. The physical book itself actually has loads of like really cool diagrams as well, which is super helpful, very important, lots of pictures and things, so would totally recommend if you're a paleontology fan. I'm obviously a little bit biased when it comes to paleontology books just because I love dinosaurs dinosaurs so much that it's quite hard to do them wrong for me. Possible, I have DNF'd a few dinosaur books recently actually, but it's hard to not have a 5-star read from me. Okay, we're going to talk next on my 4-star reads, and one of those that I finished quite recently is Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell. This is George Orwell's experiences with homelessness and poverty, and like extreme poverty, both in Paris and in London in the 1920s. It's his experiences kind of being a down and out writer. He was a waiter for a little bit, he sort of worked in kitchen staff, and yeah, it's sort of his general musings on society and his experiences. I love Orwell's writing, but this is one where it doesn't really go anywhere. It does end quite abruptly. So like, it's the kind of thing where I was enjoying the ride, but I kind of wish it had a little bit more structure to it. But when it comes to a non-fiction memoir, it can sometimes be quite difficult to structure things because life isn't necessarily very structured or organised or fitting in with a narrative arc, and that's something which, it's not the fault of Orwell that that didn't happen, but it is kind of his responsibility as a writer to put it into a slightly sort of neater narrative than what this book actually is. But like I said, I love his writing style. I've always loved everything that Orwell's ever written. I would read his shopping list from him. He just has such a wonderful way with words. So I really enjoyed it as a reading experience, and I definitely would recommend it, or any of his non-fiction, if you've only really read his fiction. I think it's kind of an unsung gem of his work, most definitely. The next 4-star read I had was Kindred, Neanderthal Life, Love, Death and Art by Rebecca Ragg Sykes. This is a beast of a book that is looking at early Neanderthals and early hominids and sort of our misconceptions of Neanderthals and sort of what the science actually tells us and what archaeology can tell us about how advanced they actually were. Now, fantastic read, incredibly informative, very interesting again if you are into archaeology, history, paleontology, etc, etc. Why only 4 stars rather than 5? First of all, because I do know a decent amount about Neanderthals already, a lot of the like surprise kind of shock twist things of like, they were more sophisticated than we actually realised, didn't really work for me because I already knew that. So some of the framing of the information was definitely targeted at an audience that I'm just not, so that kind of changed my reading experience of it. But also I definitely got bogged down in the middle with a lot of technical detail about bones and sort of more scientific stuff that, for me personally, I found the bits about more of their kind of social setting a little bit more interesting, and my reading experience of it was like very quick at the beginning and then sort of got stuck in the middle, and it took me ages to get through a few chapters, and then it sort of sped back up at the end. And because of that sort of reading slump in the middle where it just got too technical for me, that's why we've gone for a 4 rather than a 5-star read. Still incredible, still very interesting, still would totally recommend if you're a non-fiction fan, but it just wasn't quite that like perfect read for me, do you know what I mean? And then the final book I want to talk about is War Doctor by David Knott, and this was a 3-star, but honestly maybe even a 2.5-star read for me. And this was definitely the biggest disappointment of the entire list. War Doctor is David Knott's memoir of his time working as a kind of aid doctor in various war zones across the world, across his career as a doctor, and that should have been up my street because I really like medical memoirs. I thought it'd be really interesting, and in his defense, the bits where he talks about medicine were genuinely quite interesting. My biggest problem was actually with David himself. He is incredibly arrogant, and it really comes through the kind of book in general. There are many moments where he like heavily criticizes his colleagues, but he is one who can do no wrong, and it's not balanced out with times where he made mistakes. And any of the bits where he does talk about making mistakes, he always shifts the blame to somebody else. He also is just so entitled and oblivious at times. He's going into incredibly dangerous situations where he is kind of an interloper who can come in and then leave, and he doesn't think about the fact that his actions will have repercussions on the people who can't go anywhere. And there was a moment where they'd been explicitly told not to take photographs, and he was taking photographs of the sunset on the hotel roof, even though they'd been told definitely don't do that. Turns out he accidentally was taking photos of like a potential terrorist site, and they came over to be like, you're taking photos of us, you're a spy. And it was an incredibly tense situation that was luckily diffused not by him, but could have gone incredibly badly. And he goes out on several different kind of runs and out on sort of car journeys and things where he's not welcome, he's not needed, and in doing so he is in jeopardy, and it endangers other people's lives. And he doesn't really think critically about the fact that he is doing things and sort of flouting these rules that are there for his own safety. So I just found him incredibly arrogant and very difficult to actually listen to, even though the medical stuff was really interesting and like the work that he has done is incredibly good. it's just, he was a massive struggle. So I really wouldn't recommend this book as a reading experience. I think there are probably better memoirs out there, or if you are going to go for it, I think you need kind of an ability to enjoy somebody who is deeply unlikable, almost like an unlikable character, except he's not a character, he's a real person. So those are my 5-star predictions wrap-ups. I did pretty good, I think, on this one. The ones where I didn't give a full 5-star, the majority of them I enjoyed, kind of like 5 out of 6 I had a really good time with, which I think is a fairly good hit rate. I will be putting out another one of these, but I'm going to wait until it's closer to Non-Fiction November, just because I have a few other kind of yearly TBRs still on the go that I haven't finished off yet, so I don't want to overload my reading plate and then have the inevitable guilt when I don't get to certain books in certain time frames. So let me know what you think. Did you read any of these? Are you surprised by any of my outcomes? I will link my original predictions video down below if you want to do a bit of a side-by-side comparison, and have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.